With rising standards of living, the emergence of e-commerce, and increasing global integration, the Chinese fashion industry is experiencing revolutionary changes in every aspect, from everyday wear to top designer brands. At the same time, there is an ongoing exploration of fashion's role in China as a symbol of collective identity, a demonstration of Chinese self-power, as well as an experimental field of the interaction between culture, tradition, and globalization. Today, we feel thrilled to have Professor Jose Junison here with CDS to share with us her perspective on Chinese fashion industry and the global fashion system. As the Dean and Professor of London School of Design Technology at London College of Fashion, and as a fashion curator, Jose is working at the forefront of fashion industry, and she has been working closely with many Chinese fashion designers. Jose's research is focused primarily on the power of fashion as a cultural phenomenon, where Jose is primarily focusing on designers who address the current challenges in society. Starting with our first question today, Jose, in your exhibition, The Future of Fashion is Now, you address the transformations in global fashion system due to globalization. Could you tell us a little bit more of who led this transformation, in what ways does this transformation materialize, and how will this reform the existing fashion system?
Yeah, thank you. I think you're very interesting. Thank you for the question. I really believe so. My exhibition, The Future of Fashion is Now, originally displayed in 2014, traveled to China, to Shanghai and Shenzhen, and was based on actually one thing that I was aware of, that actually due to especially the rise of internet and the digitalization, that I think it was since the beginning of the 21st century that you saw everywhere in the world coming up fashion weeks, and also the option and the possibility to set up like a brand from everywhere, an online brand, for example, and to be actually have a clientele, have a partner of having just clients all over the world. So suddenly it was a very, I think, important shift, because you didn't have to travel to Paris to be there on the catwalk, to be discovered by the magazines and be picked up by buyers, because you were visible from scratch and at once. So it made it possible actually to start your business, but also to become visible in every part of the world. So you saw, I think that was amazing by that time, that you saw starting Fashion Week in South America, in Australia, in Asia, in Singapore, so all over the world. Suddenly Africa, fashion weeks came up, but also a much more diverse, all kind of designers with different backgrounds starting a fashion brand all over the world. But I think it was at the same time much more, because also I was thinking that by then, in the early 21st century, I think we really started to think about sustainability. We also started to think about digitalization, not only giving us an online platform and an online web shop, but also digging into different sort of manufacturing, into new materials. So also the whole digitalization was an important shift, sustainability, and then of course thinking in new values. Maybe just it was the end of a Western fashion system, because much more cultures start to tap into fashion, not only as a sort of exotic adding, like inspired by Chinese tradition, but actually designers coming from that background, becoming part of this global fashion world and sharing different values that actually not was like the Western is here and some other are coming there. So it was like really a sort of a point where a lot of the fashion system started to rethink itself. So in values, in digitalization, sustainability. So I think it was as a starting point where a lot of things also about body, maybe gender, a lot of things were put on the table and could be rediscussed. And I think that was an important moment to show in The Future of Fashion is Now, that a lot of I think the fashion system was really rethinking itself in all areas.
So to be more exact, how do you think this trend is reforming the Chinese fashion system?
Yeah, I think it's especially very important to look to China, because China, of course, took up already in the previous century a lot of the production of fashion for the Western industry. But I think they have been very much becoming very advanced, and what I think is amazing is that the Chinese industry actually has put much more investment into the latest technologies and the latest investment. So that's one area. At the same time, I can see that a lot of university in China have, like in the one in Shanghai, in Beijing, since they have put a lot of effort in design and fashion, and actually start to compete with the Western one. And of course, a lot of Chinese young designers have come to the UK or to US, and actually have a combination of both. They have been educated in China. They know how the Western system is working, and a lot of them, I also see that with my students, go back to China because there's a huge market, and they have different tools because they have their social media, they have their maybe Alibaba or other things, and they could, because there's not that much history, they could really try a lot of new ways, new business models, new ways of online tools, new ways of websites, new ways of marketing, and they have a very different audience. They have a huge market, and also I think a very specific audience that I really could, I think, explore and tap into. And I think because a lot of big brands in the beginning of the 21st century, like Dior, all the classic luxury brands, went to China because it opened their market. But I think now China is very ready for having their own designers and their own brands, and just exploring and exploiting the Chinese market, but not only the Chinese market. I think actually China has a lot also to become, and to, I think they are already there, to actually just participate in this global fashion world and be one of the players in it.
So you think that while this global system is affecting China, China also has its role to play in redefining the global system as well?
Yeah, I think it can, because primarily what I see is that they actually have the money and because probably it's the size, doing the investment in very advanced technologies. And so I think there is definitely a future in it. And also the Chinese, of course, have a very rich culture. If you talk about fabric, if you talk about, and I think more and more thinking sustainable, I think in a lot of cultures, it's same for South America, people go back to pre-industrial times when they actually think, okay, we did it in a way and it was very much equality. Maybe we should go back to some ways of producing and some ways of, or use some craft and techniques, but then just see how we can adapt it with modern and advanced technology. And I think that's a very rich combination. And I think you always should, we in the West should be aware that Japan, China have such a rich history. Actually, if we go back in time, some people say we're only wearing just the fur of bears in that time when China already had the most refined silk and embroideries. So I think that's definitely is a quality. And then in more theoretical terms, I always think, and that's a little bit that I was addressing also in that exhibition, I think it's just a time where we start to have conversation. Being globalized means that we all have a different culture, we all have a different background, and we start to find and to share what actually we can bring to a table. So we need, I think, always to try to explain where it comes from and how people should understand it. So a process is very important to show the whole story. And that, I think, is bring it to the table and just show why it is relevant. And because we all have the challenges, what does it mean to be globalized? What does it mean to be in a shared culture? what does digitalization and big data and all those things mean for our culture? What does sustainability mean? I think that's a story and a challenge that we have to face with everyone. So I think it's a very inclusive story, where everyone has has something to tell and something to bring to the table. And I think that's probably very new in fashion, because fashion was very much about a system, a Western system, and very much out the new trend and then the next trend and then the next trend. And I think the conversation has become now something else. Of course it's about looking nice and bringing aesthetic, but it's much more about a style, a story, the way you produce, how you produce, what's your story, and if people think it's relevant. So it's very different.
Relating back to your experience as a dean of LCF, how do you feel interacting with the Chinese students make you think about the Chinese fashion industry?
Yeah, I think in general, I think because we are LCF, that's why I really like it to be in the UK. We have like 104 students coming from more than 100 continent, from different continents, from 100 different more than 140, I think, countries. So that's a lot. And of course, quite a few of them come from China. And I also feel often very, because you think China, and actually it's so big that actually it's not fair to talk about one China, because it's a continent almost. But anyway, we have a lot of Chinese students, but in general, just we have a very mixed cultures on board. And the good thing about this is that we much more than before, especially on MA level, just really look into what people bring to the table, what the craft and the heritage they come from, what their story is, and we take that as a serious part from in the conversation. With students from China, especially the ones that come for an MA, I think it's very interesting to see, because they know very well what they're coming for. They are very well connected in China, so they come to learn from how to make collections, how to make a professional collection, how to build up a professional brand. But they have a lot of relations in China, so many of them go back in China and produce there with all kinds of manufacturers, a complete collection. So if they finish off, if they're just there, we give them the opportunity to show here. We had a show last week, London Fashion Week, but actually they are quite ready to start their own business. And I think that's very different from students from other countries, because they don't tap that easily into fashion production and fashion manufacturing. Of course, they produce a collection, but having this whole network for you being already there, and actually so I think that's a big advantage for Chinese students. You understand? Because it's really because that's also what they want. They know, okay, this is a label. It's branded already. It's this whole collection. Sometimes they even produce shoes, hats, and they know they're ready to go back, because they know that there's a market out for them, and they know they have the production network also ready. So
all these students are already going back in China, making real impact.
Yeah. So I think that's really. And a lot of them are working in that way. So I think it's probably is this specific time period that actually I think, so I see a lot of advantages for Chinese students coming to us and going back and start a business of their own. And of course we have to see what their impact is and how they grow as designer, but I think quite a few have a successful business.
So what do you think these Chinese students learning at LCF, having an education in fashion here, enable them to do? What changes can they make when they come back to China?
To come back, I think probably it's not. You could say it's the UK, but I think more important is London is a global city, and it brings all the different nationalities together. So I think actually it's that rich mixture a culture of students coming from a lot of different countries. Also, we have some of Brazil, and I think that mixed picture makes, I think, and probably also because we have a center of sustainability, we have a digital anthropology lab, so we are very much aware of the changes in the fashion industry, so students can align with those advanced digital technology, their new materials, so we are actually really helping our students and also trying to push them a little bit in that direction, looking into really the system is changing, what you should learn from this and what's your direction and how would you like to implement that in your future career. We also have some entrepreneurial guidance, so they learn to build a portfolio, they learn also things about setting up their business, but also we are learning. So we, I think, are aware that we have to throw away a lot of existing knowledge and that we need to learn from young designers and how they do their business and have their startups, because they sometimes use a very different business model, as was the case in how the fashion system was working. So I think it's also for us an interesting time to actually watch and see and nurture our students.
So coming to our last question of today about the future of fashion. So just say, what do you envision about the future of the global fashion industry? What kind of opportunities do you think will emerge, and how will these new transformations affect the existing stakeholders in the industry?
I think we only are at the start of a big disruption. So, for example, you could tell Amazon or Alibaba, they're buying already digital technology, manufacturing technologies. So I think it won't be a surprise to get like really new big companies on the market that don't have a background in fashion and design. That, I think, is one thing. The other thing is that I really believe, especially I think sustainability and thinking in circular things, just reuse, repair, I think that will of course everyone knows it, but I think business in that direction only will start off now. And then I think the whole digitalization with big data, Instagram, having your online business on Instagram, and then, for example, go to a pop-up shop and just make your business there, and you have because you don't have to, if you don't have a classical retail shop, you can skip out a lot of middlemen. So I think you have your product and maybe you put on 20 or 30%, that's your price, you hold everything in your own hand. I think so there are a lot of different ways in selling, there are a lot of different ways coming up in how we can manufacture things, because we have all the knowledge to make a body scan, we can make things to measure, we can have advanced knitting machines. So I think it's only a couple of years more to go when we can actually produce what we want to produce, probably very locally again or with very advanced machines. So I think we're only at the start of a big disruption, or maybe just really taking up new ways of doing it, and that will be the young generation. There will be space like food and restaurants for many more, and the quality of having it local, different, and that's what people would like to go from and bespoke to their niche. At the same time, I think there will also be a market for big global players, I think, and fast players. And probably there are stories already from vloggers and influencers who team up with just a manufacturer company, and they produce 100,000 of a special shirt, and they know that influencer they can collaborate with it, and as soon as the influencer will just show it, they can just sell it in 1 or 2 days. So I think there are also very different business models. So, and for the Chinese market, because I think it's a huge market, it's a very young market, it's very much able to afford, and it already has done a lot of investment in modern technology. I think it's definitely a huge market, and I think they can play an important role in this whole innovation of the fashion industry.
We would like to thank Jules again for coming. I'm sure the audience will learn a lot from your talk. Thank you, Jules, for sharing with us your valuable
You're very
experience
welcome.
and your insightful perspective on the Chinese fashion industry.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah,
How long is it?
yeah.